Hey everyone, I'm Tobi and welcome back to Tobi's Book Corner, where I talk about bookish related things. I've been gone for a little while, but your girl's back, better than ever. And I'm just excited to introduce this new series, Around the World series, that I want to do just to continue broadening my horizon, reading books from all around the world that I might not have come across, and just being a bit more mindful that I'm not just reading Western literature all the time and US, British, the usual. So this Around the World series is inspired by another booktuber, one of my favorite booktubers, Emmie. So I'll link down her YouTube booktube channel below in the description box. So there's going to be a mixture of books that are actually translated fiction and others where the author themselves are from that country. And this of course is episode 1 of this series, and I'm hoping to maybe do an episode once a month or once every other month, depending on how life goes. If I've read more than one book from a country, then I'll just choose my 2 favorite books from that country. And I'm just excited to get into this. I hope you're gonna join me on this journey. Hopefully you might be inspired to read more books from around the world, and let me stop rambling as usual and get into the video. So the first country that we're going to is Argentina, and the book that I want to talk about is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, and it's translated from the Spanish into English by Sarah Moses. And this book actually made my top books of 2021, but I haven't had a chance to shout it out since my first ever YouTube video. So I'm excited to be able to give her a little bit of attention, put the spotlight on her for a second. And this is a horror dystopia novel. Essentially, it's about cannibalism, and it's social commentary on consumerism, on capitalism, on animal rights and vegetarianism and all sorts of stuff. So we're following this man in the book. Cannot remember his name for the life of me, as he's not the most interesting character. He is a means to an end to give this social commentary that I was just telling you about. And we follow this man who lives in a society very unlike ours, which is why it's a dystopian novel. However, in this society, they've been told that all animal meat has become contaminated by some sort of virus, and this virus is fatal to humans. So it means people can no longer be chewing on their chicken or their beef or their lamb. And instead of, the governments and world organizations trying to perhaps encourage people to become vegetarian or cut animal meat out of their life, they said, hey, let's find a substitute. And what is that substitute gonna be? Humans, because why not? Why not? And so this man that we're following in the book lives in this society, and he actually works for a human slaughterhouse. And you really see how he feels very conflicted by this society, by his job, how everyone just seems to have gotten on board with this new way of life very quickly. It really shows how words and the power of language and marketing and human psychology, that once you how they can word things to make people feel okay with the fact the fact we have to eat a nose or an ear for dinner today, that's all right. A human nose, a human ear, that's okay. It just is what it is. It's horrifying because it's just so normal in the book. That's what I mean when I say horror. It's not scary and like a jump scare or really creepy sense. It's just eerie because you're like, why is no one finding this weird that they're yamming on actual people? And this is a book where if you're someone who reads and you need to feel really connected to the protagonist, to the main character, this might not be the book for you. The narration style is super detached, and I think it serves its purpose well because it just really then illuminates the true horror of what is happening in this book and in this society. And it's just the most scary, honestly, thing about this book. Scary, honestly thing, yikes, English. The most scary thing about this book, in my opinion, is the fact that it's scarily too close to our society, to our world, and it doesn't take much suspension of disbelief to believe this plot. That's the scariest part about it. That's what makes it horror in my eyes. There's not much actually really happens. As I said, you're just following this protagonist. And there is a little something going on in the background that you'll get a little shocker at the end. but overall it's just more this general eeriness that is maintained throughout the book that will just keep you turning the page and suck you in, even though there is that detached narration style, even though the protagonist isn't anyone you feel connected to or you're like rooting for in any sense. And the last few pages of this book, this ending, wow, like best last line I've genuinely ever read in a book. The ending, wow, just wow, was an easy 5 stars from me. So now we're going to travel from South America up to North America and we're going to the US. And the first book I want to talk about, and I don't think I've spoken about this book on my channel yet, and that is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. And James Baldwin is a prolific, renowned African-American author, and this is the first book I've read by him, and I'm very excited to read more of his work. But Giovanni's Room, we're following this American man who goes off to Paris, is trying to find himself, you know. He's waiting for his fiance who's vacationing in Spain, I want to say. But then he meets this Italian bartender, Giovanni, and they end up having this very, very intense affair. His fiance returns to Paris. He rejects his true nature, and we see how that just brings tragedy to everyone's lives. I just love the bitter irony of this American protagonist coming to Paris to find himself, only to utterly lose himself. He was lost in the sauce. And Baldwin's writing, my gosh, it's richly emotive, it is intense, it's powerful, and it will draw you in. It's so compelling. And even though, honestly, every single character in this book was unlikable, but it worked for this story. It did not take anything away from this novel. I just loved the way that Baldwin really captured the inner turmoil and anguish that was felt by a lot of these characters in this book, and especially the men who are really grappling with their sexuality and trying to understand their identity, accept their identity in 1950s Paris, which of course everything had to be hush hush, underground. And it was just really fascinating to see how Baldwin's like richly emotive language captured that so well. The passion, the despair, the ugliness of these characters jumped off the pages, and wow, these were fully fleshed characters who felt real, even though you're like, you are not likable, but they felt real, they felt 3D, and it just shows what an awesome, amazing author Baldwin is. Not me saying awesome when I'm talking about a US book, I cannot, but this was a wonderful 4.5 stars. It just wasn't 5 for me because even though it's short, it's quite dense, the book. Like, it's quite heavy, and at times I'm just a bit like, I need breaks from this. Like, it's a lot, but yeah, this is what I definitely would reread. I'm so excited to delve into more of Baldwin's work. The second book I want to talk about, I already have talked about on this channel, but that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And Stephen Graham Jones is a Native American author, and of course, if I'm talking about the US, there definitely has to be a Native American novel here. And this is a very unique Native American horror novel, and I still stand by what I said before. The 3 words that will always jump to mind when I think of this book is dread, paranoia, and claustrophobia. When you're reading this book, it's that feeling of there's someone just behind you, like constantly, like you just feel on edge. That's the best way to describe this reading experience. And the first 100 pages or so, can't lie, they are a bit slow. It did take me a little bit of time to get used to Stephen Graham Jones's writing style, and at first I wasn't sure, like, is this a bit of me? But the payoff for pushing past that first 100 pages, it's more than worth it. It is more than worth it. Oh, this is compelling. The left turns it takes. You cannot even guess what is going to come with this book. The plot, impeccable. Genuinely, if you have high blood pressure, I would not recommend this book because I was stressed where I'm having to put the book down and actually let my heart rate decrease. Like, I was like, I can't take this, I cannot take this. But I was stressed in the best way possible, if you know what I mean. And what I also really loved about this book is that Stephen Graham Jones, he really explains Native American belief systems and ideologies in a very accessible way for those of us who aren't Native Americans, who aren't Indigenous. And it was really great to be able to delve into that and get insight into something that I didn't have knowledge about previously. And the actual plot of this book. There are 4 young Native American teenage boys who are part of the Blackfoot community in the US. And they do something when they were teenagers they should not have, absolutely should not have. And then we follow them as they become adults. They all are living their own lives, whether they have families or, you know, they're riding solo, whatnot. And nature comes to wreak havoc. It comes to get revenge on each of these 4 now grown men. And yeah, you're going to be taken on a whirlwind of a ride. Like, it's just such a unique book. Like, I've never read a plot like this, and I just, wow. Now we're going to be traveling to Asia, and we're going to go to South Korea. And the book I want to talk about is Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. And this is a book I have not yet spoken about on this channel. It didn't quite make my top books of 2021, but it definitely would have made like the honorable mentions, because this book is fantastic, exquisite. She's thick, and I finished her in 2 days. And I'm not actually a quick reader, but I devoured this in like 2 sittings. So this is a piece of historical fiction, and it's a epic multi-generational family saga. And Min-Jin Lee depicts 20th century Korean life during and after Japanese colonization. So this was a piece of history that regretfully I was completely ignorant about. I did not know Japan had colonized Korea in the 20th century. I did not know that when a lot of Korean people then moved to Japan during colonization, hoping for a better life, the discrimination they face, the classism, just the colorism, like all these different things. I just had no idea, and I'm very grateful to Min-Jin Lee for opening my eyes to this piece of history. So this book spans, I think, about 100 years of history, and we follow 4 generations of a Korean family. And we're first following this teenage girl who's from this small fishing village in Korea. She falls for this, I think, is it Yakuza? It's like wealthy Japanese but dodgy businessman, dodgy older businessman. She ends up falling pregnant, but finds out that he's married, and she doesn't want to just go and be his concubine in Japan. So she ends up, is it a minister? I think a minister ends up agreeing to marry her. And then they go and travel to Japan. And then you see how her immediate family and then the generations after, how their lives fare being Korean in Japan. And as I said, the discrimination they face, the abuse, but also just the joys they also still find in family life, and the opportunities that, as you know, the generations come along, that they can actually benefit from having been born in Japan their whole life despite having Korean origin. The way love, sacrifice, ambition, loyalty are explored in this novel. It was just captivating, beautiful. Min-Jin Lee, her writing is simple but beautiful, and it just resulted in this breathtaking masterpiece. This was a 4.5 stars. It wasn't 5 just because I think I'm always going to have this with multi-generational family sagas. Just by the time you start getting onto the latter generations, you just don't have that same connection and emotional ties to them, because there's only so much you can write. Like, it's already, what, 550 pages. You know, you don't want a 700-page book to flesh out those latter characters so much. But regardless, the plot, the people, the way she captured this breadth of history, phenomenal. And the second book I want to talk about from South Korea will be no surprise if you have been following me on this channel so far, and that is Curse Bunny by Bora, Chung, and translated from the Korean into English by Anton. This book is the love of my life. It is the love of my life. It is one of my all-time favorite books ever. I discovered it this year and I have not looked back since. So this book, it is a short story collection. There are 10, is it 10 or am I lying? Not me saying this is my favorite and not knowing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. There are 10 short stories in this book, and what I absolutely love is that they span different genres. This is a genre-defying short story collection. We've got horror, we've got sci-fi, we've got magical realism, we've got fables, myths, ghost stories, just everything you could want. Your girl's got it. And I just absolutely loved how this is social commentary on, you know, the fun stuff in society: capitalism, misogyny, motherhood, inequality, unresolved trauma, just so many different things that we're all very familiar with. But what I loved is that we were shining light on these different problems with society through a Korean lens. And you see how these societal problems are embedded in Korean society. And I thought that was really fascinating. And Bora Chung is just honestly a literary genius. Her writing, it's pretty simple, it's to the point, but it works perfectly for a short story collection. Every short story, perfect length. Out of the 10, 9 of them for me genuinely phenomenal. One of them, which was the sci-fi one, it was still good. It was still good. It just wasn't, you know, groundbreaking the way that other stories were. The sci-fi one was a bit more predictable, you know, you've heard that kind of story before as opposed to the other ones. I was like, damn, her imagination is different, and I'm so happy about that. Anton, her translation, phenomenal. Even people who it's not necessarily their favorite book, they've still said they've appreciated that they've read it just because it is so different. If you just want something a bit different, a bit out there, but it's still, you know, grounded in the fact that it's speaking on very real world, real life, modern, current issues. I don't know why I'm being so aggressive. Then this is the short story collection for you. Generally, every time I read another short story, my mind was like, how are they still getting better? Like, and my absolute favorites are The Embodiment, the way that spoke on motherhood and the idea of the whole nuclear family being forced upon society as the only way of life, and misogyny and the gaslighting, and phenomenal. The Frozen Finger, I just loved I did not know what was going on, what was going to happen, and very, very good. Then Scars, which is the longest short story in this book, and I think it's a lot of people's favorite. It moved me in a different way. Like, I felt so attached to the protagonist in this, and beautiful, beautiful. And then Snare, that one's disturbing. It's disturbing, but it really just talks on greed and just the kind of violent, cyclical nature that can often accompany greed and the love of money and wealth, and the extremes people can go to achieve wealth. Yeah, that's all I'll say, but I think everyone should read this book. It won't be everyone's cup of tea because it is pretty out there, it is pretty weird, but to me, the weirdness is what makes it an easy 5 stars and amazing. So now we're gonna go across to Europe, and more the Mediterranean part of Europe, and we're gonna go to Cyprus. And the book that I've read from Cyprus is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. So sorry if I butchered his surname. And this is quite a popular book on Booktube. I think it might have been a couple years ago. It was really gaining traction. And it's a psychological thriller, but not your typical thriller. It's pretty fleshed out. You have a lot of character development in this novel. It isn't necessarily as fast paced as your you know, bog standard normal thriller is. We're following this psychologist who is the protagonist in this book, and he's really become quite obsessed and really intrigued by this case that happened, I think, quite a few years ago, where there's this woman who seemingly was living this pretty perfect life, a husband who doted on her, adored her. She is an artist, a painter, and she ends up shooting her husband in the face 5 times and has not said a word since then. All that she's done since then is do this one painting of herself, I believe, and that's it. That's it. She has not said pew. And no one's been able to find out the reason behind it or what caused her to reach this point, why she hasn't said a word since. And this psychologist ends up being able to go to the unit where she is kept, as she is a mental health patient at this hospital. He gets a job there and he just becomes obsessed with trying to unravel the truth and find out what led to her killing her husband, and we go from there. And this for me was a 3.5 stars. It was a good novel. Alex Michaelides, he fleshed out these characters, the character development I was super impressed by. I thought his writing was superb, and I did find myself, you know, turning the pages. However, I think if you've read a lot of thrillers, for me personally, the plot twist, the reveal was kind of obvious. I know for some people they were completely shocked, so I think, you know, of course it's subjective, but I think if you have read a lot of psychological thrillers in particular, yeah, it was a bit obvious to me, but it was a well-written book. I just was not blown away by it the way other people had kind of been shouting about it, screaming about like, wow, 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 wow. So maybe I went in with too high expectations. So maybe now if you decide to pick it up, I personally would say lower your expectations if you want to pick up this one and you can still enjoy it. I don't think I'm going to check out his other book, The Maidens. I've not heard many good things about it, and most people prefer The Silent Patient, and if that wasn't a wow book for me, there's no point wasting my time picking up The Maidens. But I'm still happy I read this book. I think it's confirmed to me a thriller. I am more about the plot. I don't need to be attached to the characters. I have too much character development. I just want for thrillers, plot. And even though Alex Michaelides got a good balance of plot and character work and character study, I need more of just the plot. So I think that's why maybe this wasn't completely up my alley. But it still was a wonderful book. I'm glad that I've read a book by a Cypriot author. So this is the first episode of my Around the World series. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really loved being able to talk about these books from all around the world, and I'm looking forward to episode 2, so look out for that. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to join the small chaotic corner of the internet, then subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.